All right, today I have with me Ken. I walk by his house pretty regularly with my kids, and so we've kind of seen each other over the years. And I approached him a few weeks ago, actually had a conversation with him, and now he agreed to do a long form podcast. And so, the point of this podcast is a couple things, but the first thing, the agenda is to kind of get an oral biography of your life from zero to now. So we can kind of go back through the decades, what life was like, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and then so forth. And then after we get through that, talk about different philosophies you kind of picked up along the way. And then we can kind of delve into stories, in your biography. Does that sound good?
Sounds okay to me.
Okay, cool. So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us just a short version, and then we'll go start back at childhood again.
Okay, my name's Ken DeLeon. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. Newcastle, Pennsylvania is a small town of about 50,000 people. I grew up there till I was 17, graduated high school. I turned 17 in March and graduated in June, and worked with my uncle for the summer of 1961 till January 17th, 1962, and I joined the Air Force, and I left the state of Pennsylvania and my hometown. Spent 4 years in the service, was in Vietnam we were considered the first all-American combat force. There was 56 of us. We went to Da Nang, Vietnam, and we were there in 1964, from October to December. We went back home, back to Kadena, Okinawa, and for Christmas and New Year's, and was right back at about this time, and I think it was 1965, and we were in Vietnam until after they bombed Pleiku and killed about 250 Army personnel, and then we were moved. We were moved. We had a F-105 squadron, and we loaded weapons on. I was a weapons loader. I loaded bombs and ammunition and everything on these airplanes. We moved then to Korat, Thailand, and I ended up breaking my arm on a F-105, and they sent me back to Kadena, and that was in late 1965. I spent most of 1965 in Thailand, and then in the end, right around October, November, when I broke my arm, they sent me back to Kadena in Okinawa, and I left Kadena and came back to the States and mustered out of the Air Force. Went back to Pennsylvania, spent a month in Pennsylvania, and I had met my wife at a friend of mine got married. He didn't know anybody who was a Catholic. He only knew me as a Catholic, so he needed a best man, and I was the best man. And I met my wife at this. Didn't know that at the time she was going to be my wife, but I met her at this wedding, and I ended up riding her all the while I was in Vietnam and Thailand, and so I liked what I saw. So I came back, and she lived in Cincinnati, and I was in Pittsburgh, a little bit north of Pittsburgh, and so all my family had me set up for a job in town where I lived, and I knew I wasn't going to stay there, so I decided that. I was there. I can never forget it. It was a Monday. I was going to be going into a job that was already set up for me. And Sunday, I took off and I hitchhiked down to Cincinnati, met my wife, and decided I was going to stay there. About a year later or so, we got married, and then we moved right out here. So in 1967, I came out here
Where's here?
Lynnwood.
Lynnwood, Washington.
Lynnwood, Washington. I've since 1967. I have lived probably no more than 5 miles away from this house, at the most. I lived in Edmonds, down by Edmonds Community College. That's as far away from here. I live down over here on where 405 and I-5 split, the little Magnolia Road. I lived there, and from there we moved here, and we've been here since the early 70s, and I don't really remember. No, it was May, and I think it was probably 72, 73, and I was working for Boeing. I came out here in 1967 in November to work on the first Boeing 747.
Nice.
And I worked there for a year, and then
Was that hard to get into Boeing at that time?
No, it wasn't. They actually recruited me from Cincinnati and moved me out here for $650. But then I had to pay back.
Oh, you had to pay it back.
And I did. You know, I paid it back.
Because you didn't stay with them long enough? Or?
Well, no, I didn't. I was supposed to stay there for a year, and I stayed there for 11 months.
Oh.
And I just couldn't handle what they were doing, so I got, and it was funny because the guy told me, he says, you only have a month, you know, and you won't have to pay us back. And I said, I'm sorry, I just can't do this.
Wow.
And I was angry at the place at the time, and I was gonna really let him, you know my true feelings. But the guy in front of me was really, he was swearing and cussing, and I'm thinking, you know, I don't want to sound like that, you know. So when I went in there, I just was calm, collective, you know, and I'm sorry, but I got to go. You know, I mean, I know I could stand another month, but I left, and I paid him back. I went and I worked as a machinist at where the base is now, the Navy base is in Everett. It's a little place called Western Gear. I worked there for about 3 years. And one day me and another kid were sitting in there, and he said, you know, he says, I can't believe I'm going to be 50 years old and I'm still going to be working in a machine shop where hot chips are going down your chest and bouncing off your face and everything. He says, I got to do something different. I'm going to go to Everett Community College. He said, I'll meet you there. And I went to Everett Community College. And
how old were you at the time then?
I was 27.
Okay.
I was 27 years old when I went to community college. And had a year's worth of Spanish, because that's the only thing I could get into. It was really good because I learned how to speak it pretty fairly well. And my mother-in-law was Spanish, and
Okay.
boy, I was the apple of her eye for a long time. So it worked out pretty good for me. And she was a great lady. I loved her to death. But I went to the school, and by that time, we had my son, and he was born in 1969, and he was probably about a year or so old when I started. I went to the University of Washington. I spent 2 years at Everett Community College, and I went to the University of Washington for 2 years and graduated. And I went back to work for Boeing. Yeah. And here I was. I got a degree in zoology because I wanted to be in the fisheries department. I wanted to work with either the game department or the fisheries department.
When you were going to school, were you also working at the time?
But yeah, I was working. I worked until I went to the University of Washington. And when I did that, my wife says, you know, I'll get a job. She said, because we weren't, you know, I was working night shift, and she was taking care of the baby. Well, I went to school during the day, worked during the afternoon shift, 3 to 11, and I fell asleep and went back to school. And we weren't seeing much of each other, you know what I mean? We wasn't, and she didn't like that. So she had a chance to join, to go to work for, at the time, General Telephone. And she went to work first part-time and then full-time. And she stayed there, and she actually retired from Verizon 30 years later. I mean,
Oh, wow.
all the while she stayed right there with that. And they changed from Verizon to Frontier to, you know, GTE. Anyway, she went to work, and I graduated from the University of Washington, and I had an opportunity because I was good friends with a gentleman. Roy Rathon was his name, and he ran the White Horse rearing ponds it was a hatchery, game department hatchery. And we were good friends, me and him and a buddy of mine, Jack. And he got me an interview with the department head of the fisheries department. I don't remember what his name was. And I went down and he was really nice. I mean, you couldn't do that now. What he told me, you wouldn't be able to do that. But he told me, he says, you know, Ken, he says, you got all the qualifications to work in a game department. He says, but here's the rule here is we open up jobs for the people in the department. And if you've been in a department, you're the first chance, you get the first chance to get this job, you know, and then they can go from the ground up. And he says, there's that list. He says, then at that time it was, I forget what they called it, but it was, you know, everybody was on list if you were a lady or, you know, whatever racial type thing, you know. And he says, there's that list. And he says, there's the one that you're on and you're at the bottom of it.
So they didn't have veterans back then.
They didn't have veteran preference, nothing. I said, so, you know, I said, what you're telling me is I'm never going to work for the game department. He goes, yeah, that's right. I said, well, you know, I said, thanks for being, you know,
At least it's upfront.
that's okay. It was frank. It wasn't a judgment call. You know, I wasn't being harassed or anything like that. It was just, if you want to wait and you got time to wait, you might get there, you know, but it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay. So I was with another friend of mine that I had graduated with. Vic King was his name. And he was trying desperately to get on with Boeing. And I had no intentions of getting on with Boeing. And we were driving back from Olympia, because that's where we had to go for this meeting. And he said, stop in at, you know, down here at the Boeing plant. It was in downtown in Seattle. Because I want to check on my application. Okay, I was driving. I said, okay, I'll stop. So I went in and he says, why don't you put in an application? And I said, well, you know.
Haven't heard that word already.
Yeah, I'd do it. So I went up, you know, and he's been for like 3 or 4 months trying to get an interview, right?
Yeah.
So I went up and I put this thing in and I gave it to him and I went back and sat down, and about 10 minutes later he called me, this guy that was doing the paperwork called me back up and he says, you worked for us before, didn't you? I said, yeah. I says, when I first came out here. He says, you even paid us back. I said, well, yeah, I said I signed a contract, you know, I mean, if I didn't make the year, I had to pay you back. I said, I paid you back. He goes, okay. He says, you can go over there and sit down. And I went back, and then Vic asked me, he says, geez, I've never been called up back. He says, what did he say? And I told him what he said, you know. So, you know, 10 or 15 minutes later, he called me back up, and he says, we're going to offer you a job up in Everett, starting out at $10,000. This is in 1972, 71, 72. And he says, we're going to start you out at $10,000 a year. And that was a bundle of money, you know, back then. And
what would you say, to give context, what was the average person making back then? You got to guess.
Well, let me tell you this. I came out here in 1967 because I was making $1.80 an hour working as a machinist in Cincinnati, and they gave me a raise. They gave me a job for $3.10 an hour. So I came out here for that. So probably at that time, about the time that I got out, you know, went through all this, you know, it was probably 5 or 6 years, maybe the hourly rate I was going to be getting would be probably 4.5, maybe from 310 to about.
Well, I mean, rough math. That would you say the average person back then was making 7,000 to 8,000, maybe?
Oh yeah, easy. You know, when I went to work for the health department, I eventually quit. I didn't quit Boeing. I guess I did, but the thing of it was. They were laying people off. I mean, I was there one time when they laid off of 3,000 people at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday afternoon at Boeing. And so I was working when they hired me for this $10,000 a year. They hired me as an industrial engineer because I had a degree. I couldn't even spell it. I didn't even know what is an industrial engineer. I didn't know what it was, you know. But What it was I was making a bar chart. Basically, you'd get these little cards and you'd cut them up, and you'd...
Computers?
Huh?
Did you use computers back then?
No, we didn't have computers. This was all like, cards. You put a card in and then it would generate a bar chart, And so basically what would happen is if Boeing was making a lot of airplanes, and I worked in the interiors division of that, the job would be short, and they'd put, lots of people on it and try to get it done. And they would move it through and take it out to the paint to the paint area and finish it up out there. They never did finish it in the office. But people would just go out there. There was hundreds and hundreds of people working at the Boeing plant then, And anyway, I went home on a vacation in September, and when I came back, they had to lay somebody off. So I was gone, so they laid me off.
So how long have you been with the company?
I'd been with the company that time probably about 3 years. So, and I wasn't part of a union. There was no seniority or anything at that time. And it was a deal where they could lay off anybody, So I wasn't there, so they didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings that were working there. So I was gone, so they just laid me off. And I came back. Well, they laid me off in September, and I'm a hunter. And that's the greatest time of the year to be laid off, You gave me unemployment, and you let me go. I hunted every day.
It's ended up working out okay.
It ended up worked out okay, So, it wasn't that they kept sending me, we'll hire you back, Finally, at Christmas time, I was thinking, well, I got steelhead season coming in now, This is December, and so I'm gonna work December till April, March, end of March, and then I'll get me a job then, Yeah. I'll make sure I get a job. So anyway, Christmas, they sent me a letter and they said, well, you have to be to work at January 2nd, but you're only working a month, But I had to go because they wouldn't give me unemployment then. So I went and I worked a month, and then they extended it to the next month. Then they extended it to the next month. This is the end of March. And when I had first got my degree, I went to the Snohomish Health District and I put an application in because I thought Health District, and maybe I could do water samplings on lakes and rivers and stuff like that. I didn't know what they did, so I just thought I'd go do that, And I forgot all about it, And in April of when I was, going from month to month to month, and they come in, they offered me a job. They offered me a job starting at, what was it? $744 a month. That was gross.
That's a little more than what you were making before?
No, I wouldn't have made $10,000 that year. I was still on a $10,000, stipend when I was working at Boeing. So, and I thought, well, this is permanent. Where Boeing, and at that time, you didn't know what Boeing was going to do. There was nothing. You just all of a sudden,
Right.
Yeah, there was nothing there. You can be working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and tomorrow you'd be laid off. Yeah, they don't do that now. They've changed that. That doesn't happen out there anymore, which is good. But so when it became that was a permanent job, and I was thinking, I got a wife and a child at home. I got to make sure that I got an income, and I'm working for the government, so it was an easy job.
Yeah.
Okay. I worked in the lab for about 3 years. Now I was overqualified to work in the lab, and I got to know everybody in the department. And Clarice Height was a doctor there. She was a health officer there, and I had some pretty good guys, and they thought I was a pretty decent guy, and there was an opening for a sanitarian to work in a food program. So they offered me the job, and I moved from the lab upstairs to the sanitarian, and I worked there for 27 years.
Yeah. Long time.
Yeah, and retired in 2003, and I've been retired since April of 2003.
Cool. All right. So now I want to rewind a little bit and now drill in on, for people who know you personally, maybe they don't know as much about your childhood, and then just the avid listener or listener who doesn't know you but wants perspective on what life was like back then. So I want to go through the different let's go from what was 0 to 10 like.
And that was fun time for me. I mean, we didn't have a whole lot of money.
No one.
Yeah, no one really did. All of my friends were the same. I mean, none of us were any better than the other, and we were really close. I had and a few of them have died now. But I grew up with about 10 friends that I can almost count on, and we were together all the time. We played, and during the summertime, we had a gentleman named Jim O'Rourke, greatest guy in the world. He big old fat guy, worked for the railroad, right? And here we are. We're 8, 9, 10 years old, right? And Jim played for the Scrazzo's Tavern softball game. And there was a little field called Lee Avenue, and the left field was Lee Avenue. Jim was the power hitter, right? So behind his house was a big field, and we named it Stump Stadium, okay, because there were stumps in there. All of us kids dug the stumps out, right? Right field was a dump. There was a dump at the right field, and I was the only left-hander, so I had to learn how to bat right-handed, because if you hit the softball into the dump, it was an out. So I had to learn how to switch hit. So I was a switch hitter, okay, and we put poles up there. We had telephone poles. We dug holes and stuck them in the ground and tightened them up and everything. We had backstops, and Jim, like he worked on a railroad, and he had really strange hours, and we would come down and we'd all get together. We were at his house almost every day in the summer.
Yeah, his own kids.
Oh yeah, he had his. Well, Johnny was really small then. Okay. He couldn't play with us. He was a little bit more than a baby, and we would come down there, right, and there you had 8 or 9 of us, we'd split up, and we were on a team, and Jimmy was the pitcher, softball pitcher, right? And we had, well, as we grew older, we would cut the grass with our lawnmowers, and we'd all get our lawnmowers, and we'd go out and we'd cut the field. So, if you go down the right field line, and if you got in the weeds, that was a foul ball. You wouldn't have to argue about that, right? And as we grew older, we would provide, you could hit it further. We would go and steal snow fences and we put the snow fence up.
You just take it from someone's yard?
Yeah, no, it was our highways, they were on the highways out there, stop it from being snow. Yeah. That wasn't crime for us. It was like, we needed a fence, right? So we hit it over the fence and got a home run. So we did that. And then he would come out, and he was the pitcher all the time. We played all day long. I mean, all day long, from light, to the point where it was dark. We were leaning down, and you could see the man in the light that was, at sunset. Yeah. And if we got into an argument about whether you were out or safe or anything, Jimmy had this little booklet, and it had Babe Ruth's name on it, right? And we'd get into an argument, and he would say, "Wait a minute," he says, "I'll pick out the book here." He says, "Babe Ruth says you're out." Babe Ruth says you're out, you're out.
He was your umpire. So
he was your umpire.
He'd be out there a lot. Which...
Oh, he was absolutely wonderful with us kids. He became a constable, right?
Yeah.
And so finally quit because he was afraid he was going to have to shoot one of us, because well, we were kind of rowdy. We did some dumb stuff, I mean, when I was a kid, we did some dumb stuff, but he kept a book, a scrapbook on every one of us kids. I can tell you there was Bob and Pat and me and Jack and Warren and Frank and Larry and Gene.
So did you ever join an actual softball or baseball team?
Oh, I was on a high school baseball team, and then I played American Legion before I left.
So 0 and 10, playing with your friends.
Playing with my friends. And
let's contrast that to what do kids do today? Let's contrast that to what kids do today.
Oh, they don't do anything.
They don't play outside.
Yeah.
They don't go outside.
They don't go outside at all.
They don't really have friends.
Yeah.
What are they doing all day?
They're watching. They're looking at their phones, or they're on a computer playing stupid games that I mean, blowing up things and all that, and they wonder why they can't figure out what's going on in our world. And we never did that. If we didn't,
I'm a tough.
Yeah. If we weren't out, when we were kids, if we weren't playing ball, if there was something that we, for some reason we didn't go down to gyms and play softball all day long, we were out in the woods climbing trees and swinging from tree to tree. We would get on these maple trees and would get them moving, and we would try to jump from one tree to the other. I mean, we had a good time. We'd go fishing. I mean, there was old Hoffmaster's Pond, and it was full of bluegill and bass and everything. And we had this old swimming pool. This guy, it was one of my uncles, and when he sold the house, the guy that bought the house didn't do anything with a swimming pool. So we go catch these bluegill and bass and carp. We'd throw them in a pool, and all of us learned how to fly fish in that swimming pool. We would fly fish out there, and you hit the wave, bring it back, and poof, we never killed any of the fish. We just put them back in.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. That was our fun. In the wintertime, that swimming pool became our ice rink. We played hockey on it. It wasn't real big, but we weren't real big either. So if it was 6 feet deep in the summertime, if you wanted to swim, you could swim in it. It was 6 feet deep right in the middle of it.
I'm assuming during that time, pretty minimal adult supervision.
Yeah. Well,
adults really watching.
No, the only adult that watched us was Jim when he was out there, and he was referee softball.
Did you have any siblings?
I have a sister. My sister was 8 years younger than me.
A very big difference.
Yeah, there was a big difference in it. And my mother and father, and all of us were the same way. Whenever they needed us, they would get out on the car and they'd blow the horn, and wherever we could hear that, you heard the horn, you got home, and you didn't fool around, you were going home, and so that's how we did it. We had a pretty good time. We as kids, we used to go steal corn off the Catron's farm, and we'd throw corn at people's window, and
Did those people get mad?
Oh, sometimes they did,
But it is like...
It was like kids, And what are you throwing at the window, corn didn't hurt anything,
Yeah, people throwing rocks off a I-5.
Oh, yeah, no, we never did that, I mean, the worst thing that we ever did, we'd get balloons filled with water, right? And we'd hide behind this big tree in Jimmy's yard, right? And somebody would come down in the summertime, it was really good. Because they'd be driving with their windows down, or sometimes there'd be a convertible. We'd loft these balloons filled with water, and
So was there a guy in your posse that would come up with these ideas, or is it like no way?
A lot of us we just
I got this crazy.
There was never anybody that was the ringleader. It wasn't a gang, I mean, it was like that's why Jim, when he was a constable, he was afraid he was going to have to do something to us because we were always together. I mean, in the daytime we were playing ball, or we were out in the woods, or we were going fishing, or in the nighttime we slept out in summer night. In summertime we would just throw a sleeping bag out on a porch and would sleep outside, and that was when we were really we would go out and steal all the tomatoes out of gardens, and watermelon. When I remember old Doc Hammerell, used to make like big watermelons. We go out and get his watermelons. He was pissed.
Did you guys never watch TV much? Was there shows?
No, TV didn't, it wasn't a big thing then, I can remember my first TV was a great big box. It was probably about 2 foot square, and the TV was about 6 inches square inside that big box.
So, but people listen to the radio? Would you listen to baseball?
Yeah, we listened to baseball games. Well, on the radio, yeah, that was a big thing, Sometimes we listened to the Inner Sanctum and the Lone Ranger on the radio, if us kids would, because those were the things that was playing. Howdy Doody was on the radio, I mean, those are the things that we didn't spend much time doing that, because as we got older now, and as we become teenagers, we'd before I left for the service in my teenage years, we would play pinochle. Everybody would get together, it'd be a half a dozen of us, and we'd play pinochle. You could play pinochle all night long, I mean, we played cards, and in the wintertime, it was sled riding and ice skating, and we were outside all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were in the house, you were sick, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it was. That's growing up, I mean, growing up, I had, we were all hunters. All of us kids became hunters.
With your dads or your parents?
Our dads, oh yeah, we didn't have, when I grew up, we didn't have hunter education or anything like that. My hunter education was my grandpa Mike, my Uncle Moody, my Uncle Paul, my Uncle Sam, and my dad. And when I did something wrong, it was a boot in the ass. It was not, boom, don't do anything wrong, you can have that gun. And the guns were available for us. And my dad never had a safe, and he had guns all over the place. But I never touched them unless I asked first, they never said no. Whenever I wanted to shoot, shotgun, rifle, pistol, anything. But don't you dare touch it.
Yeah.
Without asking permission first. They were never loaded.
Here was the gun safety.
Yeah, the guns in my house were never loaded. The ammunition was in one spot and the guns were in another. You didn't need to have it. We never locked our door.
Right.
When I was a kid, we didn't have to. Lock cars, we never had to lock that stuff. It was always open. That you can't do that. Now you see what happened in my yard, don't you?
I saw that. I was like, I don't think I drove by the other day and I saw someone drove through your yard
and did all the donuts and everything.
Here.
I was asleep. I was asleep, and I didn't hear anybody.
Fortunate.
My wife woke up and she says, "The light is on. We have the motion light." And I said, "Well, I said it could be anything. If a coyote or anything walked by, I could set it off. Because it's pretty sensitive. But it probably was at the time when that happened. But
yeah, I saw that because it ruined your grass too.
Yeah. It's one of Lynnwood's finest. Yeah.
That's something you would have done when you were a kid. Hey.
No, we never did that. In all honesty, we never did,
or trying to purposely harm.
No, there was no vandalism. If you were vandalizing something, you were vandalizing one of your friend's house. I mean, you wouldn't do that, Yeah,
they were just a common respect I think you had back then where
absolutely
you don't have that much.
And respect is something that I think has been lost here, There would be no way that even as I grew up, even as I became an adult, when I moved here in 1972, I was in my 20s. I mean, I was 25, 26 years old, whatever it was, 1971, 70, I was probably almost 30. And the gentleman and the lady that lived next door, they were as old as I am now, probably close to 80. And they were never Helen and and Walt. It was always Mr. Tutmark and Mrs. Tutmark. I mean, if I was an adult and I wouldn't call them by their first name. It wasn't. That's just not right. And when I do something to mess over their their property? Absolutely not.
Right.
You know, and that kind of stuff is not happening anymore, and that's sad.
Yeah.
You know, we can say anything we want to say about, you know, all this, you know, stuff about racist and everything. It's respect.
Right.
You know, you respect the person that is there, no matter what their religious or their ethnicity is. It's you know, you know, until they give you a reason to not, then if you don't want to be around them, whatever. You know?
Yeah. So played baseball in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Were you on a good team? Did they go anywhere?
Yeah, we were a championship baseball team in my high school. It was we used to play in the Western Pennsylvania WPIAL. I can't remember what it was. WPIA Athletic Association or something like that. And it was a group of high schools. You know, there was in the area that, and we were always pretty much top of the game. We went to the state.
The town you grew up in, what major city was near?
Pittsburgh was 60 miles south of us.
Okay.
And Youngstown, 18 miles away on the west side. Erie and Cleveland were a couple hundred miles north of us. And those were the big cities. You know, there was nothing really big in our town. Our town was one of the big. Newcastle was one of the bigger towns, and it had about 50,000 people. Big steel mill.
Your parents do for work?
My dad was he worked in the Johnson Bronze. They made bearings in that for the B-52s, and they were military things, you know. And it was a pretty much of a steel mills town. Mesta Machine, Pennsylvania Engineering, Johnson Bronze, and they were the big manufacturing places, you know. Now those buildings are still there, and they're all dilapidated and run down and fallen down. You know, hasn't been anybody in them in years. But you know, my mother was a stay-at-home mom. She didn't work until my sister went to school.
Yeah.
She stayed home, and then she went. What she did was she was a cook for the high school, and she cooked. You know, after my sister was 6 or 7, and she started this school. There was no reason for her because I was gone by then. I was in the service, and my sister wasn't home. She was in school, so Mom went to work after that, and she worked for the school district for several years as a cook. And back then, these people actually made their own recipes from home. You know, I mean, everything now is prepackaged. It's just
frozen.
Yeah.
So high school ended. Were you drafted?
No.
Or did you volunteer?
I volunteered.
So was Vietnam War going on at that time?
No, Vietnam War was the Vietnam was a advisor only group at the time.
What made you join the Air Force versus the branches?
I was, you know, everybody that I grew up with, all my friends that I grew up with, they all went to college, Slippery Rock College, most of them, and they became teachers, math teachers and history teachers, and you know, and whatever, you know, and I was done with school, you know, I had no intentions of going to college, but I had to do something. Okay. And so my intentions was to make a career in the service. I was going to go to the Navy at first.
They have the 20-year thing back then?
20 years. Yep. And you could retire and you could have a pension. So I looked at that and I thought, I'm going to go to the Navy. And so I had my intentions of going to the Navy. And then a friend of mine, you know, him and I were hanging around together then, you know, and because most of the guys were getting ready to go to college, and this was late in the summer of 61, and John Smilowski and I were hanging around together, and he says, I don't want to go to the Navy. He says, I don't think I want to be out in the ocean all the time. You know? He says, let's go take a look at the Air Force. So we didn't want to go to the Army. We weren't going to the Marines, you know, because, you know, those guys, I didn't want to be a ground conqueror, you know, man. I thought going either to the Navy or the Air Force, I would get some kind of a training, that I could use after I got out.
Yeah, it's interesting what every branch has its own stereotypes.
Yeah.
Even back then.
Even back then, yeah. Yeah, you had the ground pounders, you had the Marines. They were just glorified, BT people. They were tough. And
did they have the ASVAB test back then?
Did they?
ASVAB?
No, I don't know. They were just starting the Rangers and stuff like that. They had gotten, and actually the Air Force had just gotten away from the Army. It used to be the Army Air Force.
So
but
it just split.
Then they split. I don't know when they split, but they split pretty close to the time I went into
back then. Did you? So like now, if you want to join the military, they make you take a test called the ASVAB test.
Mm-mm.
And depending on where you rank, they're like kind of like their IQ. So if you go low, they're like, hey, these aren't options for you.
Yeah.
If you rank high, then you have more options.
Yeah.
Back then, they didn't.
Well, they did, but you had to join first before you.
Oh.
So you
signed the dotted line.
Signed the dotted line, and then they gave you this.
Yeah. You're like, get out that.
And then, they give you this test, and it was kind of like I don't know. I remember doing it, it was multiple guess type, I guess you call it, and I scored high in electronics and mechanical, and they actually just led me down Primrose Lane with this, here I am, I'm coming from, I'm a small town, kid from the sticks, and naive as that day is long. I mean, I'm sorry, but I had no idea what was going on in the real world, and so I saw this weapons mechanic, and I goes, "What's this?" He goes, "Oh, they take care of the guns and ammunition and everything." I said, "Oh, it's right up my alley." I didn't know that the guns were cannons on the end of an airplane, and the mechanic of it was the bombs were what I was. They suckered me right into that.
That's better.
So I went down from Newcastle and went to Pittsburgh, joined, and right then and there, after I joined, I raised my hand and I took the oath. Man, I knew I think I made a mistake here.
I wonder how many service members have that.
Whoops! What did I just do to me? Man. Hey, this guy was just in my face, man. I don't think I was done with spitting out the oath that he was in my face, I'm thinking, oh God. Anyway, well,
you made it through.
Yeah.
After the first year where you get used to it.
Yeah, actually the first 6 months, I went down in January of 62, January 17th, and I went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, who took a train down, and I don't know how many weeks I was there, but eventually, where I was going to go, the tech school I was going to go was in Denver, which was pretty nice. And it was, I can't remember, Lowry Air Force Base, I think it was. It's not there anymore. It was east of Denver, out by at the time it was a Stapleton Airport, and they closed that too. They made a bigger airport in Denver, but Aurora is where it is. And so we had I think we had 6 weeks of basic training on what you were going to do, the munitions you were going to load. I mean, I loaded everything. I loaded nuclear bombs, and I loaded napalm. I loaded 500-pound bombs. I loaded rockets. I loaded missiles, yams and GARs and everything like that. Guided air rockets, guided air missiles. I mean, I did all that stuff, and talk about being naive. I turned 18 in March in Denver, right? And that was the first time I could go out off the base. So I thought, okay, and all these guys, and they knew they had this kid, man. He was just a snot-nosed 17-year-old. He had to get his parents' signature in order to get into the military, right? And so I went, some of them had cars and everything, but they wouldn't take me down in their car, right? He says, you got to get in the bus, Aurora, go down here, get on the bus, Aurora. And he says, you go into town, you go right down to the Capitol building. He says, get off of that bus. He says, walk across the street, go in the first bar you see. Okay. Well, I'm 18 now. I'm allowed to drink beer legally. You can drink 3-2 beer. I'm getting ready to do all this, because these guys are talking this out. And I had drank home. I mean, I drank beer when I was a kid, but I didn't drink much of it because you didn't take your dad's beer, He knew how many there were. And so I used to drink the wine in the cellar. Got caught doing that a couple times. But anyway, my dad found out, and he looked at me. We could drink wine at supper time. I'd get a little glass, a little shot glass or two, I could drink it. But they'd go down, it's every Friday they'd go down, he'd get paid, and every day they'd go down to the store downtown Newcastle, right? And when I turned, 13, 14 years old, I wouldn't go with them anymore. I was going out as a kid stuff, I was bigger than that. Well, Dad didn't know. I knew where the key was. He had a locked wine cellar, but I could get
They're smart. They figure out.
I got the key and opened it up, right? And he kept kept the glass down there. Whenever he wanted, he'd just go over to the barrel and open the tap and still my glass up. So there's like a window, and I'm sitting there. I got my feet up on the bench, right? And they had just left, and I waited until they got down over the hill, right? So I thought, they're gone. So I went down in, I got in the wine cellar, and I opened up the tap, and I'm sitting there, and I got my feet up on the thing, and then all of a sudden, there's my dad's face in the window looking at me and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Drink that and get out of that wine cellar, and don't you ever go back in there like that."
He let you finish?
Well, I finished. Yeah, he let me finish. You didn't have to throw the wine away.
You waste it.
But anyway, that was my involvement with alcohol. I drank wine. That was it.
Let me ask you this: did it taste good to you at the time?
Oh yeah, still does.
How did the taste?
I can drink. In fact, I came back home here this summer. One of my cousin's son was making, which is called a Dago Red. Okay. It was Italians that it was it was like a Chianti, and it was.
So ever from the beginning, you've always enjoyed the taste.
I enjoyed that. I don't like bought wine. I don't like Chardonnay, and I don't like all that, goofy stuff that you can buy now. But Cabernet isn't bad. There's a couple of Cabernets that my wife drinks that, and every once in a while I'll take a little glass of that stuff. But Brian give me a couple of bottles of his homebrew, his own mix. Oh, I sucked that right up. That was a good wine
or something. Is that what it's called?
He calls it Chianti. Yeah. When I was growing up, it was Dago Red. We'd get 2 boxcars every year, full of grapes, white grapes and red grapes. I never did like the white wine, and we'd make it. We'd split it up. All of my uncles, my grandfathers, everybody in the family made wine. We had like 3 barrels of wine in my basement in my house all the years I was alive.
Really?
Yeah.
So what's the short version, how you make it?
Well, you have to have a press, and you press you put it the berries or the grapes in the press, and it was a hand crank, and you pressed it down, and you got all of the wine out of the grass, and then the mash, you leave the mash in for a little while, then you take it out. I don't know how they did it. I was too young really to figure out how they did that, and they did it sometimes when I wasn't there.
Leave the skin and the seed.
Yeah, you do. You take that out, okay, and then you leave it in oak barrels for about a year. So the wine that you're drinking is at least 1 to 2 years old. When I came back from the service and my uncle gave me we drank a gallon of 13-year-old red wine, and I drank the crap out of that thing. And my father was a little bit upset with me. And he said, you know how much you drank today? Yeah, I don't know. He said, you drank a lot in the service, didn't you? And I said, no.
So you're just letting it sit there.
Yep.
Is there anything else you mix with the...
Nope.
Well,
yeast. They would put yeast in it.
Yeast.
The yeast would make the...
Kind of sweet.
It was dry. Yeah, I guess it was probably sweet. Yeah, I don't know. I like that wine, and it's a dry sort of I don't know what taste you would call it. It's not a grape taste. It's
And I like grape juice,
yeah.
but I just,
Well, my uncle used to make wine out of grape juice. I don't know how he did it, but he fermented it and everything like that. He just used Welch's grape aid. He would make wine out of
just
it.
let it sit out with
And he did make a couple bottles for him when he needed it. You know?
cheaper.
So that was growing up in my family and in my time. I think it was the best time in the world, honest to God. I we got in our fair share of trouble. I mean, we weren't perfect kids. You know, I mean, we did some stuff that probably would, be considered, not.
So I was listening to a book recently, and they were kind of describing life back then versus life today. And he said, yes, people were poor back then.
Everybody
was everyone is poor back then. So no one knew. So you didn't look at your neighbor and envy them.
No.
Because you all were the same. Where today, there's lots of millionaires. There's lots of billionaires. And so you could be making pretty good money today, right?
Yeah.
But the reason why you're unhappy is you see that guy who's making an exorbitant amount. And you see that guy who's making exorbitant. So it's like, yes, we have it better today as far as things and materials.
Yep.
But there's such a disparity between the haves and the have-nots that it's like, it's envy. So I thought that was interesting because it's like, yeah, back then, if 99% of people are just average and poor, then you're all fine. But now you have like, you just, you can
look in your neighborhood.
Yeah. You can see that. And so whether that's conscious or subconscious, that envy that you have, that is what, because I think you would agree, most people are wealthier today than they were.
Oh, absolutely.
A long time ago. But because there's such a disparity, that's what causes you didn't have, like today you have celebrities, you have athletes, you have all these businesses, they're all making a ton of money. And then you're over here and you're like, I'm working maybe just as hard.
Yeah.
But making way less.
Way less. Well, you talk about celebrities and athletes and stuff like this. I can remember the headline in the Newcastle News when Mickey Mantle made $100,000 a year. Okay? Big. The whole front page was Mickey Mantle, $100,000 a year to play baseball. Yeah? That was unheard of.
Right. But even then, that's only 10x more than a good income. Where now it's like the contracts that people get
$400 million a year.
It's like, okay, 10x is fine.
Yeah.
When it's like
40x.
Yeah. So like they're talking about how CEOs back then of companies they made more than their employees.
Sure.
But not like now it's like the CEO of this company made 20 million.
Yeah.
Whereas the average employee makes maybe 50,000.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's not
in
range of anywhere. So he was saying that's why so many people are unhappy. Now, if everyone just made $100,000, then it's like, I'm not pushing for that, but that
I hear what you're
theory on why so many people aren't happy.
Well, there's so much of a disparity between the people who provide the service and the people who are in charge of the people who are providing. It's like, and it gets to the point where it's like this now, where it used to be like this. Okay. And you could accept it because you didn't really know how much these people were making. You knew, I knew that Flaherty's, who owned JB, lived up on a North Hill. Okay. If they lived up on a North Hill, they had money. I didn't know how much money, and I really didn't care because everybody that I knew lived in the township, Union Township. And we went down and we bought tennis shoes. We all bought heads because that's what we could afford.
Yeah.
We didn't have all the stuff that the guys up on the North Hill had.
Yeah.
Right. And we knew that, but it wasn't that different.
Yeah.
For us. And when we went out, those guys up on the North Hill went out to the barn and danced out in the country music out there just like we did. They didn't know. We didn't know. We get one car.
Now you have elites where you have a little money, you don't really hang out with people with less.
It's like the kids in my school. There was probably half a dozen guys who had cars. When I was growing up, we didn't have a car. My dad had a car. We had one for the family. He had it. was his car.
Yeah.
If I wanted to go out on a date, I had to ask for that car, beg, borrow, and steal for that car. Uh-oh. That ain't good.
The power go out?
Yep.
Oh, interesting.
So, did you just turn that light off? Okay. Wait a minute here.
I was like, that's still new.
That's propane though. That.
All right. So, enjoying the military kind of because you were bored with just being like.
No, I wasn't bored. I had a plan that I was going to do. You know, when I graduated high school, like I said, in June, and my uncle was he was a carpenter. He was an excellent carpenter. He was an alcoholic, but he was a carpenter, and he was building these homes. They called Lynnwood, and I did.
Pause there. Define alcoholic to you.
Well, okay. Every morning, we would get up, and I'd be down at his house. He was my uncle, and I'd walk down to his house, and we'd get in his station wagon, and we'd drive down over the hill, and he would stop in Frank's bar, and I could go in with him. You know, I could go in. I couldn't drink then, you know, because they wouldn't serve me, but I could go in with him, and he'd drink 1 bottle of beer and 2 shots of whiskey. That was breakfast. He'd buy a 6-pack of beer, and we'd drive out and we'd do the work. Lunchtime we'd come up and he'd drink the 6-pack of beer. We went home. He'd take me home, and he'd drive back down to Frank's Grill, and he'd have his Boilermakers. So what we call.
How old was he when he passed away?
He was in his 80s. He was a, you know, and I am probably, his kids are my probably closest cousins. Okay, and I spent as much time with them as I could, and my Uncle John he treated me right. You know, I mean, I worked my butt off for him, and I told him that when we started all this, I said, Uncle John, I'm going to work with you from June, when I graduated, until the last Saturday in October. And I said, nice Saturday in October is hunting season. And from hunting season, it went from October, November, December, and it ended in the second week in January. And I said, I'm hunting every day. And I did. You know, I said, don't call me and ask me to come to work, because I'm not gonna.
So this was in high school?
This was when I was 17 years old.
Right before
I joined. And then from that day, I told him, I says, when the season ended, when the small game season ended in the first week of January, whatever it is, I says, I'm going to the service. I'm going to go into the military. And that's what I did.
So the reason why I bring up your uncle, an alcoholic, is so today there's been a lot of research on the benefits, consequences of alcohol. And so I think most people know that health-wise, alcohol is not beneficial.
No.
But yet you have people that do it regularly, and he still lived a pretty long time. I think if you make it to your 80s, so then people can look like that and be like, well, was he an exception to the rule? Because do most people who drink alcohol to the level he that make it that far?
Yeah.
Or would you say that like affected his quality of life? I mean, he probably felt like he had a high quality of life, or did he have, basically I'm trying to make a case potentially to someone. My opinion on it is do what you want, right? But to make a case to someone young, hey, or to someone that's in it, it's like, would you recommend just avoid alcohol altogether? Because you could probably have a different type of life. Mm-hmm. Or, hey, it worked for him, but he maybe could have had a slightly higher quality. I'm curious what your thoughts are on alcohol consumption at a high level like that.
He ruined his family.
So it did ruin his family.
It did ruin his family.
Okay.
And his family, you know, they wouldn't back off. Okay. My aunt, his wife, you know, they never got a divorce, but they didn't live with each other. And neither of them ever had another, you know, my uncle didn't have another girlfriend, and she didn't have another boyfriend. They They were 40 years apart, still married. They both died in their 90s. Well, my aunt died in her 90s. My uncle died 87 or 88.
That's impressive.
Yes.
And did he drink alcohol like even
No.
in his 80s?
He was your down on he was a drunk on the street in Belfair, I think it is, in Bethel or someplace like that, and it's right next to Philadelphia. And he finally went away, and he went there, and he was on the street, and he came back for my sister's wedding, okay? And his father, my grandfather, was a hard-nosed Italian. He didn't mince words at all. And my uncle, loved his dad, was his dad. And he went out to visit his mom and dad, and his dad met him at the door, and he says, "You are not welcome in this house. You are not a man. You are an alcoholic, drunk." And my grandfather was too, okay?
He was functioning?
He was, but he took care of his family, okay? I mean, my grandfather went through a gallon of Old Granddad every week. My mother bought it for him, and we had 16-ounce acai beers. I think it was, or either that, or no, it was another beer. I can't remember what it was, but he used to have them, and he'd drink Boilermakers all day long. But he took care of his family, and he says, "You're not my son if you can't take care of your family." Well, that was the day that my uncle stopped drinking.
He didn't need, like some people, he hit rock bottom. Some people need to go to rehab, but just your dad's disapproval of him was enough to...
Yes. Yeah. He hit rock bottom, and I'll never forget it because I knew my uncle was a full-blown alcoholic. I mean, everybody did in the family. And I'll never forget it. He came...
How old was
he? Was probably about 40. Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah. Oh, hard drinking. I mean,
what do you think caused that? Just initially fun, and then it just started.
I don't know. I think it's.
Did he experience some trauma?
Yeah, I think it was just. He was a pretty good athlete, and he got hurt, and both of them, both of my mother's brothers were very good. As a matter of fact, my uncle should have been a professional baseball player. He was playing back in the time when played against Babe Ruth and a couple of the other big time stars. But he got hurt in the service, and it ended his career. He got banged up in a Jeep accident, when he was in the service. But my Uncle John, the one I'm talking about, he did too. He got hurt somehow, and back then, athletics was most important.
Yeah.
And you were on a pedestal with everybody.
Yeah.
And then when you got knocked off the pedestal, you just couldn't survive.
Yeah, it's hard to. You have to reinvent yourself.
Yeah, and he couldn't do that, so he got into the bottle, right? But anyway, he came, and I'll never forget it. I was out washing my sister's car because she's just getting married. And Uncle John came up here and he says, "Ken," he says, "this is the last day I'll ever drink. I'll never drink another drink again." I said, "I had my last drink," and I thought, "Yeah, I'll go. No problem. Yeah, that's a good deal, And I kept watching the car. I'm thinking, I don't know that that's going to happen because, I didn't see that, and he didn't. He never did. And his kids, my cousin Jack, my cousin Cynthia, my cousin Greg were his 3 kids. And they couldn't accept the fact that he wasn't with their mother because their mother was with them, and their mother was just put up on a pedestal, my Aunt Carmel. And so, when he passed away, they were having a problem. And I wrote him a letter. And I told him, I said, "I know your feelings, what it is." I says, "Your father, his first 40 years he was not there."
Yeah.
And he was a he was a problem. I says, but his next 40 years, his last 40 years or 47, whatever it was, I said, he was a perfect person.
Yeah.
You know, and I think they still have it. I gave it to him. I mean, I wrote him a long letter because they were, and when he passed away, they were, you know, Greg just barely, you know, made amends with him. And Greg was probably close to 40 when he died, you know, because Greg's not much that younger than me. He's probably.
Yeah, the reason why I'm bringing this topic up is alcohol still is an issue today.
Yes, it is.
Like,
it is.
You'd think we would learn from history, but as I think about history, most of us don't take the time to go read history or learn from history. And so you've heard the saying, history repeats itself.
Yeah.
Well, why? Well, because people live their life and then no one actually takes the time to go learn from their mistakes.
Sure.
Like the reason why technology explodes the way it does is we're building upon technology, right? It's exponential. But the human experience, someone lives it, they pass away, and the next person doesn't start where that person left off. They go back.
Exactly.
And keep redoing it. And it's like, you'd think over time we would
figure that out.
Get smarter. Like, I mean, there's scientific studies as far as like alcohol has lots of negative. Like, I understand why people do it socially, right? Because it's like, a lot of times, initially, it's peer pressure. Your friends did it, you did it. It's interesting that you enjoyed it your first time.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of times, the story I hear is people don't like it the first time they try it, but they do it because their peers are into it. And then some people, they know how to control it so it doesn't become a big part of their life.
You do.
And then other people, it just becomes all-consuming. So that's something I think about as far as alcohol. And then the other $1 million question I have is there's different themes to people's life, right? Some people go through something traumatic and then they hit rock bottom, right? And for some people, it can take them years, decades. For, you know, your uncle, it was 40 years, 20 years of just meandering through life and then finally hit rock bottom and turn his life around.
Yep.
So my $1 million question is, for the people that hit rock bottom, how do you speed that process up?
You can't.
And that's the answer I'm getting.
You can't.
But I push back on that and say, the reason why I think there is a solution, and now it's not the same solution for every person, but the reason is, why do we read books? Why do we educate? Why do we learn? So that I speed up the learning process, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you went to college or you go learn something so that you don't have to learn through trial and error. You were like, okay, this person went through that. Now I'm going to take through what they've learned. So that's why it's like, can't we apply that to rock bottom? Or, because it's a common theme through life. Not everyone has to go through a deep, deep valley. I don't know what percentage of people that have to go through rock bottom. But it's like, from an outside perspective, it's like, hey, like everyone sees what that person is going through, right? And everyone knows the solution. But how do you get that person? Like, is there anything you can do? Be like, instead of wasting 10 years, how could you have gotten to hit rock bottom at 30? That's the $1 million question. I don't know the answer to.
I don't think you can, because in all honesty, only you can tell when you're at rock bottom, okay? Only you can look at this thing and say, I mean, why is it that you know, people on drugs overdose 3, 4, 5 times? I mean, I lost my Brian's wife, my cousin's son's wife, lost her sister while I was back in Pennsylvania this last summer. And she had overdosed at least 5 or 6 times. They brought her back.
How old was she when
she was probably about, well, Leanne's only in her 30s, but, you know, her sister probably early 30s, you know. So she didn't know she was at rock bottom. How can you be brought back with, you know, from death, you know, and not figure out that you're at rock bottom? And it took her 4 or 5 times, and she finally killed herself. You know, and Leanne was distraught. I mean, I didn't know what to say to her, you know, because she loved her sister like there was, and she kept bringing her back. You know, I mean, she'd make sure, she'd check on her. You know, she knew, and yet that person didn't know he was on rock bottom. So it's like until you yourself can say, I'm there, you know, this is wrong and I can't do it anymore. And it's the same way with alcohol. But you look at alcohol, you can have 80-year-old alcoholics. You're never going to have an 80-year-old drug addict. They're going to die before they're in, because an alcoholic can, you know, he's eventually he'll pass out and he won't drink anymore.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at the science, but, you know, a lot of people who are heavy alcoholics can damage the liver, so you can shorten your lifespan.
Oh, yeah, because you get cirrhosis of the liver.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's a physical thing.
Yeah. So there's a lot of physical things in your body coming. But these are themes that I'm like, as I hear these stories, I'm like, okay, we know these are reoccurring problems in the human experience.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what do we do to speed this up?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think you can.
Through these conversations with you, it's like, not that I'm going to find it, you know, like, there's a right answer, but it's like, is there a formula? Is there a process to be like, hey, if you continue down this route, I know that's going to be pain and suffering for you and everyone around you for the next 20 years. How about we skip that, right? And we fix you now.
Yeah.
So that the next 20 years of your life isn't pain and misery.
Well,
but I don't, like you said, that's the answer I get from people is you can't.
Yeah, I think most of it is education, and I think it's probably has a chance with the internet and with social media and everything. You can see, you know, if you can show these people, here is what you're going to be. You know, do you want to be that way? Okay, I mean, look at an alcoholic, and he's you know, sprawled out in the you know, drunk on his behind, you know, laying on the ground, and he's, you know, puking and everything else. This is where you're headed. Do you want to be there? You know, and hopefully it's just like the cigarette thing. You know, I mean, a lot of people quit smoking cigarettes when they started saying, you know, this is dangerous to your.
Yeah. So back when you were a kid, pretty much everyone's.
Yes, I did. You know,
you saw the data.
Well, no, I got pissed because I went from 25 to 35 cents in a shows. So
$1. So when did you? How old were you when you quit smoking?
Well, I was probably, let's see, 23, 24.
Socially, everyone back then smoked.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you did. You know, and I started smoking because of the service. You know, if you didn't smoke in the service, well, you got a smoke break. You know, well, you weren't smoking, so you could go at the power unit, or you could go over here and you can do this. Well, I ain't gonna go there either. You know, I'm the only one that's doing all the work around here, so I'm gonna start smoking too. You know, and that's what I did. You know, so my 4 years in the service, I smoked. You know, I started smoking, and probably, well, up until my son was born. You know, when my son was born, by that time, then they were really harping on the Marlboro man that was dying of cancer and stuff like that, you know. So,
you know, work out well for now.
Well, so we
did people back then know it was bad for you, but they didn't?
No. I mean, it was there. I mean, you can look at some of the ads. If you look at some of the old ads, I mean, if smoking was that's a thing to do. I mean, well, every once in a while I'll get somebody will have an old advertisements that you see in that, yeah, and that's what we were looking at.
Yeah, I think it was either World War I or World War II. They rationed out cigarettes.
Sure, we used to we had K rations in the service, and there was Lucky Strikes or Camels in it.
Even military.
Yeah,
ration.
Day right. You get a pack of the cigarettes. There would be about 4 or 5 cigarettes, and you know, a little thing was about 2 inches wide. You're gonna have them in a K rations.
Yeah, it'll be interesting in 40 years when I'm, you know, 60, 70, looking back and be like, I can't believe I did that, because now the science says you shouldn't have done that.
Why? Yeah, I mean, you look at that and you say that, and I can remember when, poor God Almighty, Gene and Dan, we were in this. I had a '66 Mustang convertible, and Jen and I were in there. We were smoking Winstons, right? I mean, the car was just polluted with smoke. And poor Gene and Dan didn't smoke, and we had a back window down there, and we're in Cincinnati, and it's December. It's like 20 degrees, outside, and they got the window down because they can't breathe, and there goes the smoke out the window, man. And we did that, I mean, we didn't think anything of it, and nobody said anything about smelling cigarette. I can walk into somebody's house now if they're smoking, it's like walking into an ashtray, you can smell that stuff, but back then, my mother and father came out here, and when they came out here, the very first time they came out here, Mom she was smoking heavy. She was smoking Old Gold.
How old were your parents when they passed away?
Mom was 91. Dad was 71.
I mean, that's interesting. Your mom lived till she was 91. And that's where some people so if I try to make a case to someone, hey, live a healthy lifestyle. And they're like, well, this person didn't do anything, right? They were never deliberate about their health.
Yeah.
And then they made it to 90 plus. So then how do you argue?
That's right.
How do you argue against that? Because you're like, okay, well, is that an outlier? Or, because most people, now the science says if you smoke, if you're overweight, if you drink, then the high likelihood of chronic issues are going to come from that. And you'll be lucky to make it past a certain age.
You can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I can look at myself. I'll never live to the age my mother lived. She lived till she was 91. The only thing she took for her entire life, and she started when she was like 89, they finally put her on blood thinners when she was 89 or 90, okay, warfarin. But before that, all she took was an Aleve whenever because she broke her arm once, and whenever that would bug her, she'd take an Aleve, right? One. I'm sitting here taking
Her whole life.
No, she smoked until she came out here. My son was probably maybe, I don't know. He was when she came out here. I don't know if he was a teenager or not, but they had smoked for quite a while, and we had stopped smoking, of course. And we even put no smoking signs on our door, and you can come in our house and smoke. And you can smoke out here, you can smoke, So Mom and Dad were coming out the first time they were coming out, and I don't know how old they were. They were fairly young, I mean, they were probably 50-ish, and 45, 50-ish, because, and I told her, I said, Mom, you're welcome to come out here. I says, leave your cigarettes at home. She was absolutely irate with me.
Yeah.
Leave my cigarettes at home, right? She did. And she came out here, and she was out here for like 2 or 3 weeks. They were out here for 2 or 3 weeks. And she didn't smoke a cigarette, and she never started back up. And as we got older, I'd go home with her, she says, I am so glad you made me quit smoking. She says, but I was so pissed at you.
Yeah. And then I feel like a lesson we learned from that today, society tells you if someone's doing something harmful, rather than calling them out, and you probably didn't call it out on her because it was harmful.
Yeah.
But today we would tell people you need to affirm that poor behavior.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't know if that's the best thing to do. If someone is doing something that is harming them or someone else, rather than affirming it, you shouldn't be like, hey, maybe we should reevaluate that behavior or action.
Well, that was, I gave her the option. I said, if you want to smoke, you can smoke out in the garage. And it was summertime. I mean, it was warm, so it wouldn't have hurt them to come out here and smoke. And they just didn't, and they quit. Both of them quit. My dad, he had quit, I think, a little bit before my mom.
What did he pass away with this?
He had cancer. Yeah, and my father's side of the family, I'm probably one of the oldest ones living. pretty soon. No, I had an aunt that made the 90. She made it to 90. I'll be 80 here in March. Okay, and but on my mother's side of the family, I had a great grandfather that lived to 106. Okay, and all of my mother's siblings all lived into their 90s. And again, a couple of them, my Uncle John probably, he didn't make 90. He was
These
probably
people
80.
that lived that long, did any of them ever put any emphasis on health?
No, they didn't. No, they didn't.
Because now there's such a big push on it.
Yeah.
And it's like, do all these things. And it's like, you had these people who didn't. And so they're like, okay, it's genetic. So if you're just an average person, layman, you're looking at anecdotal evidence, you're looking at science, and science is saying, do this and this and this, and then you'll live longer. And then you're looking at these other people who literally didn't do any of those things, right? Now there's the morning protocol, there's the cold plunge, there's the sauna, there's the exercise, there's the cardio. And maybe if you do all that, you'll get to 100. But then you have the people that didn't do any of it, make it to 106.
You make yeah. I mean,
you think through that, and I think if you are proactive about your health, I think you can extend the quality of your life for a long period of time, possibly.
Well,
it doesn't mean you're going to live a long time. It means that you can function physically for a long period of time, where I think a lot of people, and you can probably attest to your family members, their health just slowly go down, and then hit certain decades, and they could probably do less movement.
Yeah. Till
eventually zero movement.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that. I think that I look at myself, and if I go to the gym 3 times a week. Now, I don't spend a whole lot of time there. I mean, I'm there for half an hour, 3 times a week. But I think if I was there, my quality of life is better because I do that. And I can almost guarantee you that if I do a little bit of walking, a little bit of exercising, and drink and watch how much food I stuff in my mouth, I can lose a couple of pounds, 2 or 3 pounds, and I'm much better than I was if I didn't, And I am of the opinion that as you get older, if you slow down, if you stop, if you sit, you're going to die quicker. I had a gentleman who lived till he was 99 years old, a good friend of mine, Gerard Loop. And at 93, this guy was still driving. He was, he walked into a place, and if you grabbed him, shook his hand, you had to hold on to his hand, because that guy he had a grip on himself. And he was 93 years old, and he was still shooting a 12-gauge shotgun and hitting clay pigeons out of the hardest type of sporting equipment that you can do. It's called 5-stand, something like sporting clays. And you get 30 shots. He routinely shot 28, 29, and 30.
That's impressive.
At 93 years old.
So was he skinny?
No, he wasn't. He was a little chunky. But I asked him one day, I said, Gerard, I says, how do you do this? I said, you look better at 93 than some guys look at 50, And he looked at me and he laughed. He says, Ken, he says, just don't sit down. He says, every day. He says, I don't walk far. He says, I walk down, I had a mile, go down a mile, and I walk back a mile. He says, it's 2 miles every day. Yeah, he was. He was, at that time, he was a widower. His wife had passed away. But, he says, I walk. He says, whether it's snowing, raining, sunny, didn't care. I walked that 2 mile spot, and he says, then I come out here, and he says, and I'm active out here he was fixing trap machines when he was in his 90s. I mean, this guy could, he was, the dexterity that he had, and it was, the fact is, he said, there's a song out now, it's by Toby Keith. It's called Don't Let the Old Man In. It's true. Don't let him in.
Well, every time.
Yeah, you got to, my philosophy is, I got so many heartbeats and so many breaths in me. I ain't going to get an extra one, and I ain't getting cheated out of the ones that I got. But before I get there, I don't have to be a physical wreck. You know, I'm going to do everything I can. You know, like I said, I'm going to be 80 years old in March. I'm going hunting, elk hunting next, if I'm alive, next in September.
All right. So I do want to get a little bit into philosophy.
Sure.
But let's kind of, you got out of the military, went back to college, did Boeing a few times, but let's kind of talk about life between 30 to 60. But having kids, with that, how many kids do you have?
I only had one.
So one kid.
Yeah.
You wish you had more?
Yeah, it's not that I wish I had more. I had a condition called pars planatus. I lost the sight of my right eye.
You can only see out of that eye?
You only see out of the left eye, yeah. And when they were treating this eye, they gave me some, you know, Chris was just a baby then, and he was a youngster. And they treated it, and they, you know, and I was losing the sight of this eye. And they gave me some medicines, some shots, and I took them. They said that they wouldn't guarantee that I wouldn't have a child with a birth defect. The names of the drugs was, I'll never forget them, Leukeran and chromobuterol. And that's what they were treating cancer patients with, you know. And they said that they thought that this would stop this condition, right? It didn't. But when they said that, you know, Jen and I, it was too soon to have another baby, okay? And you know, we talked about
the high condition.
I think I was 26 or 20. It started when I was about 25. I think I lost sight of the eye by the time I was 27.
Was that depressed? Did you go through depression when you lost that?
No, it was scary. It was scary for me because I didn't know why it was happening, you know. And it happened when I was in college. I was in Kane Hall. There's no windows in Kane Hall. It's just a big, huge 350 seat auditorium, and I was in there. And as I was listening to the prof down there, I would see flashes, you know, like it looked like there was people with back then we had flash bulbs on cameras, right? And it would get a big flash. And I would see these things, you know, and then and they did it all day long, you know, and I thought, what the hell is that? You know, and couldn't figure it out. And I got home that night. It was like in front of my eyes, it was like a whole bunch of dots, little dots, just going around. So I went and saw an ophthalmologist, and he diagnosed it right away. And he sent me down to another one down in Seattle. I still go to them, my associates, Dr. Guzak and Thorlickson. Dr. Schultz sent me down there, and Dr. Schultz said, you know, he gave me a shot in my eye of this stuff, this chromobuterol, and he told me, he says, you know, I wouldn't recommend you have children. He says, because we know that this creates birth defects. And
do they have a better treatment today? Do you know?
No.
Still get the.
Yeah. I finally had an eye operation, and this disease was caused. It looked like bands of cartilage that grew across your retina on one side and go to the other, and then they would shrink. They were pulling the retina off my eye, and one of those bands grew. Where your optic nerve is, there's a spot that you can see that actually makes you see. One of them grew into that spot. And the guy Dr. McLean, I'll never forget him. He was so calm, he made me nervous. I mean, the guy he was just the calmest guy I ever talked to, Thomas Doctor. You know, and he said, I got as close as I could to that. He says, but you're going to lose the sight in your eye. And I did. It just went away.
After you lost it, you just accepted it. It wasn't.
Yeah.
I think some people would have gone through depression.
No, I didn't. I just, you know, the thing that pissed me off the most was I was shooting my bow right-handed, you know. I couldn't shoot it anymore. I had to change to left-handed. So now everything's left-handed.
So did you more dominant your left now?
Oh, yeah.
So you just had to learn to
I learned how to do it. You know, I mean, I shoot everything now left-handed and everything. The only thing that's difficult about this condition, having just one eye, you don't have any depth perception. Okay. So you can look at something and you say, well, that's pretty close, you know. Yeah, you can maybe judge that as 10 or 15 feet or something like that, you know. But when you look out there, okay, I look at that house over there, and I don't see the distance between here and
When
there.
you're driving.
Well, that's tough.
Just still make sure you're behind me. If I see a big truck, I'll get out of the way.
Well, you know, I do, and as I got older, you know, the situation gets even more critical because you don't have the side vision, okay, and then I got cataracts in that thing, and then I got that fixed up, but that was scary because you can't tell. You know, there's a lot of distance between me and the car in front of me, and I've so far never had any problems.
These newer cars, do you know what is available? These newer vehicles?
No, I don't. The newest ones I have is that's a 2005.
So these
PT
new
Cruiser.
cars, I have newer cars. The new cars keep you in your lane.
Yeah.
And then you can turn on cruise control.
Yep.
So that it adjusts to the car.
Keeps you in your lane.
Keeps you in your lane, but it will. So let's say you want to go 70.
Yeah.
It will adjust your speed to the car that's in front of me.
Oh, so if you're doing 70 and he's doing 50,
It'll automatically.
it'll automatically.
That's something I would probably have you look into
Yeah.
as you get older. I use this stuff all the time because it's just now. My wife doesn't really like it,
Yeah.
but I just drive.
Yeah.
I don't have to have my
Feet on the pedal or anything.
because it will just adjust for you. So obviously with Teslas,
Oh yeah.
they do it all. But even all these new cars, they'll at least keep you in your lane and keep you at a distance.
I have to ask my son. He's just got a brand new Toyota Tundra. See, but he has all the goodies on it, you know. And
Yeah, so that's maybe, if you get to a point where you feel a little uncomfortable, I don't think you necessarily have to stop driving because a lot of these cars.
well, so far so good, you know, man. Everybody has been telling me I got to get rid of my diesel because it's too big, and
It is a big boy.
but you're not telling me anything. I'm sorry. I'll tell you when I'm going to get rid of the diesel.
Yeah, I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm saying if you ever get to the point where driving becomes uncomfortable,
Yeah,
they've added all these aids.
I know that the
Because
technology.
I tell my kids whenever you start driving,
Yeah.
it's like car will drive for you.
Like, will.
All you have to do when you do your driving test is push the button. It will do the parallel park. It will do pretty much everything.
It would do everything for you. Yeah, and with me now, I've got to the point now where I don't have any problem with walking as far as I can to get out of it, but I don't back up in a parking lot. I wait until I can see. The only time I'll back up if I'm going to pull in a parking lot is I'm going to back up into a wall, you know, or
I mean, when you got a
something like
big
that.
vehicle like you, most people just get out of the way.
Yeah. I just don't, and I don't take it in some places. You know,
I'm driving downtown Seattle.
I know. You know, if I'm going to go into Seattle, no, it's the cruiser goes in. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's you know, it's like everything else. You know, I mean, you have to be, just because you have this big truck, you can't just put it anywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So be smart with it. It's like, I'm not going to go to the Walmart store at 9:00 tonight, you know, because it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Right? So if I'm going to go to the Walmart store, I'm going to go in the daytime when it's,
Yeah, I tell people nothing really good happens between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m.
yeah,
If you're out on that time,
yeah. What are you doing?
this sounds morbid, but you probably pass it all the time. There's like a stop sign with flowers around it.
Yes. Down here.
And so these kids were out there at 2 a.m. and they got hit by a car.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel bad for the family,
Yes.
but I would, caution my kids,
Don't be out there.
don't be out there at 2 a.m. in the middle of the road.
I mean, I look at people now, you know, I mean, and understand something, you know, I mean, even I'm watch really well, but there's people walking their dogs and at 8:00 at night now, you know, come on, guy, get up earlier in the morning and walk them in the morning, you know. What are you walking at 9 o'clock? And not only that, instead of having something like that green T-shirt on or something like that, they don't have a flashlight and they got a black hooded sweatshirt on, you know? You go by them and all of a sudden you see, well, God, there's a human. Thank God I was on the middle of the road when you were at the side of it, you know? But why do you do stuff like that? I mean, it's like, don't put yourself in that kind of a situation.
What I'm really interested in now is in your 30s to 60s, and we'll talk a little bit about retirement. Did you ever get to a point where like you picked up on philosophies or personal development, or you just, you worked for the government and you kind of just went through that, or was there any person or book or idea that you've heard that you decide, hey, I want to take on this type of framework as far as how I want to apply this to my life?
No, I always, I always, in my work, I always wanted to be somebody that was. People in government have a bad reputation of being power hungry, and I watched it and I saw it. I didn't like that. Okay. I always gave people who I had to call on and I worked with, I always thought I have to give them the respect that they have. They're doing the job. I'm going out and I'm looking at these people with book knowledge. Okay? You're in a place and you're in a restaurant and you're working your butt off, and you need to know the rules, okay? The rules to not hurt people, what you have to do with food, what temperature you have to be, how you have to handle it, what you have to do. These things here screw things up, okay? So you watch that and you talk about that in a situation, not, I want you to do this because the book says you got to have a hat, no hair or anything. If you have hair in your food, it's not me that's going to. I've never had a foodborne illness because there was hair in the food. I said, but I get calls all the time. And that person will not go back to your place and he will not speak highly of your establishment, okay? So it's up to you. If you don't want to cover your hair up and you don't care, that's fine with me, You can go ahead and do that. But when I come into this place, I want you to have the food at the right temperature. I want it to be cooling in 3-inch pans. I want it to be hot on the line at 140 or above. I want you to cook chicken to 165, pork to 150, and everything.
You inspector that whole time.
Yes.
You did the same job.
Not the same job.
Yeah,
I had most of it. Most of it I did restaurants, schools, and pools. And there was one year there that I was PEC's bad boy, and so they made me go and check out garbage complaints.
What'd you do?
I just went out and cut up.
When did you dig it on naughty list?
Oh, it was just personality thing.
Is that pretty common when you're working in, like, if you're not?
Well,
and political, doing the right things.
No, yeah, it is. I mean, you got people who are obnoxious, let's say. I mean, and I was always, I beat to my own drum. I mean, I did the things, and I always made sure my immediate supervisor knew what I was going to do when I was going to do it. Okay, so if I had something that I had to take action against a situation, I would draw it out and tell them, here it is, I was never one that went out and paper filled. I used to hate that.
Yeah.
I didn't just write stuff down to make me look good. I went out there to make sure that
it's not like you have a lot of the skills for an entrepreneur. Is that something you ever desired to start?
No, I don't. I mean, that's nothing that, but I always think that there is, you can learn from people, all the time. And it's just because I don't, I mean, I'm not aware of things. I could tell somebody, you have a 5-gallon bucket over there of clam chowder. I said, that isn't good. I mean, you can't have it outside here. and I did this. I said, take that 5-gallon bucket and put it in the refrigerator or the freezer. Well, what I didn't realize, these guys knew that if they kept it out, okay, they would be able to sell that product for a lot longer, because you get a 5-gallon bucket of clam chowder, you have it, a week later, you have a softball size interior of that thing. It's still probably 100 degrees. 96.8 is your temperature for you to hurt yourself. That's just a bacteria is just bubbling up in there. Well, these guys would call that souring, okay? If I put that stuff in the refrigerator, I could only get a couple of days out of it before I had to throw it away. So I'm throwing away maybe 2 gallons of a 5-gallon bucket. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay? So when I told, and when we decided to change this into a smaller, flatter pan, they were able to sell all 5-gallon buckets up. So that's, and that's how you address that.
Working there for so long, did you help change some of the guidelines and policies?
Yeah, I did.
Work? I'm curious, in the government, did they work with, was there a committee that came up with these guidelines? And some of the people were from the restaurant, so it wasn't just people sitting at a desk making up rules?
Yeah. The state had the option of doing that. We had a I forget what they called it now. It's been a while now, but we had a class that we would bring in, managers and restaurant supervisors of restaurants, and we would discuss different situations and get their opinions of it. Okay, and if you took that class, you got, your fee was reduced a smidgen. So a lot of them took it, and that's how we changed the operation of the. I can remember one time, it was Rick Zalka, the guy. He was in charge of this thing, right? So we made this deal. We want to suggest this to people. We don't want to make it a something you have to do, right? Well, I had this one Mexican guy out there, and he just couldn't figure it out. Every time I went in there, it'd be rice one time, it would be this the other time. He would do it, but he didn't fix it all up, right? And so Chris asked me to go out and take care of him, right? And I never forget, his name was Mateo. Great guy. He was a great guy. And I didn't want to harass him, but Chris said, look, he says, I've been trying to get this guy to fix this stuff up. And he says, you just can't get it. He says, so go out. He was going on vacation. He says, go out for me and take care of him. I go, okay. So I went out, and he says, he knows he's going to get through. And so I went out, and I forgot to take all the stuff that I had to close him with, all the paperwork and everything. So I thought, shit. So I go out there, and he had all kind of problems wrong with it, and so I went back. I says, look, Mateo, I says, I'm going back into the office to get the paperwork to close you down. I said, but I won't do it if you get your act together and fix this all up, right? So I give him an out, right? So I went in and I came back, and so we were just starting this plan up, right? So I says, I want you to take this class. I said, no, it's a manager's class, manager's certification class. Okay. So I says, get on the phone and call this number. And I didn't realize, right? So he calls it, and he gets the voice machine, the voicemail, right? So I'm behind him, and I said, Mr. Zahalka, and Mateo would go, Mr. Zahalka. He says, I want to take your manager's certification class. And I'm saying this to him, and he's talking to Rick, It's on a tape machine, right? So I get him all set up, and I says, we're going to be doing this. Is going to be okay, right? So I go back in, and Rick comes up, and he's just a great guy. he ended up being my boss for a while, you know, and he goes, Ken, he said, he says, I know you want to help this guy out. He says, but you can't stand behind him and tell him what to say. I said, well, this is going to work. He coming in, you know, and it did. And I met Mateo. I saw Mateo even after I retired. He said, I'm so glad you did that for me. You know, he said, that was the best thing that ever happened, you know. And I says,
It seemed like you really enjoyed your life.
I did.
Because we got a lot of people, they do what they hate.
Yeah.
And they do it for a long time. Then, like, what's the point? So it sounds like you found something, you enjoyed it, you stuck. Most people don't stick at a job.
Yeah.
Especially today for 27 years.
Yeah.
Looks like you build relationships with your clients within the office, and you made that work. So does every restaurant get inspected?
Yes.
Often?
Yes.
Often.
Well, we try to do them 3 times a year.
A lot.
Yeah. But you look, you know, but we had,
Like,
yeah, it's random. Well, we have it set up.
sure, it's changed.
Yeah, it has changed. It's changed a lot. I mean, now they do it on computers. There's no paperwork or anything like that. I don't think I could do it now, you know, but because it wasn't, it was, I got in just at the time. They had a computer on my desk. I never turned it on, you know. And Mary, one of the girls that used to be his, Kenny says, you got to turn your computer on. You have 350 emails. I said, well, you can take them off.
Still, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I sat right there. My boss was like right there, right? They put me right out in front of his office. I said, Rick, I says, if you're going to tell me I'm going to do something, I says, either tell me or put a piece of paper on my desk. I said, because I don't open up the email. He goes, okay, Ken. And that's the way it was with me there. You know, I mean, I made sure that my immediate boss was always understood what I was doing, you know, and I never, and I enjoyed the fact is that there was guys in the office. I mean, he'd call me and Chris, another guy that I was with, you know, we were about the same age, and we did the job the same way. You know, we weren't power hungry. As a matter of fact, I thought I had too much power. I mean, I could go into any restaurant and I could close any restaurant. If I had enough, I could make the points spread enough that I could close them every day of the week.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not what you know, for me it was.
Your job is to protect the public.
That's all it was. And protect him, too. Yeah. I mean, you know, you're an owner. You're going to get sued up the behind if you hurt somebody. If you're found negligent, you're going to get in trouble. And I didn't want that to happen either. It's like, you know, and for me it was, I come into your establishment. You're working that establishment probably from 11 o'clock in the morning until, you know, 12 o'clock at night. And I said, you're doing that 6-7 days a week. And I says, and I'm in there for, at the most, on the whole year, 3 hours, an hour each time, maybe. I have to assume that, you know, if I tell you something and you can bits with me and tell me whether or not it can happen or not, and if you think you can do it a different way and get the same results, I'm fine with that. Okay, but you got to do it that way all the time. The results are important, and so for me to come to your establishment and tell you to do something, I have to assume that you know, I'm competent enough and I'm truthful enough that you can listen to me and take my advice and go with it.
Your current inspector?
Nah, some of them aren't. No, I don't. You know, some of them I know. I mean, I worked with some of them that were dipshits. I mean, I'm sorry, but I probably shouldn't say that. But they were. Yeah.
All right. So I think, I mean, look, me hearing your story for the first time sounds like, you know, 20 to 30, you're figuring out life. You know, did you at 20, or even when you were a kid, did you know what you want? Like 22. So I'm picturing something that I know personally. When you're 22, did you know what you want to do with your life?
At 22, I knew that I had to plan on what I was going to do when I got to a certain age. I always thought that when I was 35, okay, whatever I was doing, that's where I had to be, because I needed 30 years into what I was going to do in order to, at 65, I was thinking, going until 65 to retire.
Yeah.
So, and that's how I ran my life. And I lucked into the health district because it was something I could do, and I enjoyed it.
Sounds like you had a lot of the benefits of being your own boss.
Yes.
You were able to kind of set your own schedule. You didn't act like a typical employee that was just told what to do.
Yeah.
So you had a very interesting government job.
I did.
You were almost run like an independent contractor. You just happened to get paid from the state.
The state. Yeah.
But you had a lot of freedom as far as traveling, driving,
and
just sitting there at a computer mindlessly.
Yeah. And the other thing is I kept up on all of the new and everything that was happening. It's like I had supervisors. In fact, one of the guys that I was, he when I first got in there, he was a brand new doctor. He just got out of college, right? Chris Spitters was his name. And Chris was a great guy. And
did you work up any corporate ladder at all?
No.
You primarily stayed in the field.
Well, again, like I said, I had a mouth on me, and I didn't hesitate to use it, and if I thought they were, for me, it was like, I'm in here with you and everybody, and if I thought you were barking up the wrong tree, I didn't hesitate to tell you, and I probably could have been more diplomatic. In there, it was, you're the boss, I'm the guy. I'm going to, we're going to discuss what's going on. At the end of the day, you say, the red box is blue. The red box is blue, I may not, agree, and I try to figure out a way around telling somebody that the red box was blue, and that's what it is. If I couldn't convince you that what I was saying was intelligent, or had some kind of basis to it, then, you're the boss. Make the rule. If it's stupid, it's stupid. And I'd say that, right? So it come to the point in time where when I had the most seniority in the health district for years. I was one of the very first ones that the first guys that had joined. Everybody was gone. That they were retired, and I moved in and took over the spot. And then everybody behind me that came in, they went from 90 people to 270 people running in the health district, right? And so I had the most experience, and I had been there the longest. And so when they started dividing things up and making people, supervisors and lead people, they always made a way of having it that I didn't have a master's degree, or I didn't have this, and I didn't really care. No, I had a one of the girls that was she was a lead person. She looked at me one day, she says, "You just come in here, Ken," he says, "and you smile and laugh and can joke around with everybody," he says, "and then you go out and do what the hell ever you want to do, don't you?" And I said, "Oh, no, Lisa, I always follow the rules." And that's the way it was with me, man. I just get, it was just, for me, it was a fun job, and I like going out and I like talking to the people. And even after I retired, I had people call me up and ask me at home, "Ken, I want to do this, and do you think I could do that?" I said, "Well, yeah, you can." I said, "I'm not in the health district anymore, so you can't use me as a reference, but this is how I would do it if I were you. But make sure you tell the inspector that you're in there, what you're doing."
Yeah.
And I did that. I did it for a few years.
So let's talk about retirement, what led to it, and then what's the past so many years been like since retirement, and then what do you see the future? Do you think about the future? Do you think about that?
Well, I retired at 59 years old. And
I don't think you can retire at that age anymore, can you?
well,
Didn't they increase it to like 62 or something?
well, it was always 62. But I retired at 59. I had 27 years in as a, and I had a 30-year commitment in order to retire. So I could use military time.
So you can stack it.
Yeah. So I worked till I was 27. I had 27 years in, and then I took 3 years of my military and
You can stack
yeah.
it. What state?
You could. Back then you could. I don't know that you can now. But see, I was in a different retirement system. I was in a PERS system, PERS 1. Now everybody was PERS 2 and PERS 3. There might even be PERS 4. I don't know. In PERS 1, there's probably not very many people left in that. I'm probably one of the oldest ones that are there, because just right after I joined Health District, it was a year or so later, they got away. There was no more PERS 1. And so all I had to do was get 30 years in, and I got 60% of my retirement, whatever I was making, and which at the time was great, I mean, I don't know what it is now, but so I retired at 27 and I added the 30 years, and basically the health department called me back every summer until I was 62. One of the girls would get pregnant,
Did you work?
Oh yeah.
Oh, so you did go back. So.
For the summer, and I told him, I said I'd do that until 62, until I got Social Security. And I said, because I was going to take Social Security at 62, I could. I said, and I'm not going to fool around trying to figure out how to, with the government, and taxes and all that stuff. I said, so, I'll work with you guys. And it was fun, it was funny. Because this one guy, he was a senior supervisor, right? He just did not like, and for a long time I antagonized him. I did every little thing, and I knew that would tick him off, right? Yeah. And I just stayed under the line. He couldn't do anything to it, So yeah, no, yeah, he was younger than me, and he just, I just graded on him, and so I quit doing that, like 3 or 4 years before I retired. I thought, yeah, come on, you gotta grow up here a little bit, maybe mature a little bit, But he just could not handle me, right? And so the very first time I came back, I used to come into the health district, and I was purposely 5 minutes late every day. Every day. Supposed to be there at 8 o'clock, and I'd show up at 8:05, right? Everybody knew it. Everybody knew it, They knew, they watched me, man. And I'd come in there, and somebody would say, Ken, how's your day? If I was any better, I don't know what I'd do with me. And I'd go up the stairs, so I came in on the first day of the work, and everybody, all the guys that I had worked with for years, they were all downstairs waiting for me to come in. 8:05, I walk in the door, right? I walk in the door, and here's the supervisor there, and he goes, Ken, he says, and I set the dress code there, In the wintertime, I had a sweatshirt on with long sleeve. In the summertime, I had a T-shirt on, And I'm going out and work with these people, I'm not going out in a suit. I'm not going to do it. Yeah. They don't want to see me in a suit, and they come in there, you look like an idiot. So I'm going up to Darrington and Arlington, and everything, back up to Salt.
Go in your own vehicle, or do you use it?
I had a county car. Lots of times I drove my own vehicle. I used to like to tease them with it, because I'd take my own vehicle on a Friday and go up to Darrington, and I'd tell them, where are you going? I said, I've got to go up and check the river, see if I can go steelhead tomorrow morning. But I'd go up and do all the work up in Darrington, And those guys up in Darrington said, we always know when you're coming up, Ken. He says, you haven't been up several Fridays. He says, you'll be up one of these Fridays. So, I mean, that's kind of the way it worked with me, And I knew they used to call up ahead of me, And anyway, I came into the office at the very first time I worked past after I retired. I walked in there, and it was summertime. So I had short sleeve T-shirt on, and jeans. And I walked in, and Bob walked up into me, and he goes, Ken, he said, since you left, he says, we instituted a dress code. He says, and you have to wear a shirt with a collar. And I looked at him and I said, Bob, he says, you're lucky I found one with sleeves. And all the guys in the room goes, oh, no, he's back. Bob just looked at me and he goes, he just took his head like, there's nothing I can do with this guy. They needed me, you know. It's like,
You're calling me to come work.
yeah. Yeah, and Zahalka he says, oh God, he says, I'm glad you're back. He's handing me these papers. He says, go and do anything you want to do, you know. I went, okay. I took them all, went out and did them.
You kind of worked your way into retirement.
Yep.
And then how'd you keep busy?
You know, it didn't take me very long to get involved in. I got involved in the gun range, the Kenmore gun range. You know, I started doing a lot of work down there, you know, fixing targets up and doing that. And I volunteer. It was all a volunteer thing. I never got paid for it or anything like that. But I enjoyed that because I could go down and I could shoot my bow and I could, you know, if I didn't shoot guns. I don't shoot guns much. I do a little bit, but I love my archery. And I still go down and shoot quite a bit of it. But so I got involved in that, and by then my son had his first daughter, my oldest granddaughter, and we watched her for them, you know, and we watched her for quite a while until she was like 3 years old, and then they put her in daycare, and by that time then the second one had come, so we watched her till she was 3, you know. So, you know, that was 6 years there of you know, being around the house and doing things, and it got easier and easier, you know. I mean, I worked around the yard and I worked around in down at the range, and I just did what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. You know.
What's the future look like for you? Do you think about that much, or you just doing it?
I just take it one day at a time. You know, I mean, it's like I know that, you know, I'm going to do some work in here. I'm going to make some arrows. I'm going to tie some flies. In the wintertime, that's what I do. I end up going down and during the daytime and shooting the bow and everything like that. And so it's become you know, the work around the house is getting more difficult for me. And I mean, it's, as you get older, it's harder to cut grass and everything like that. And usually I was good.
Are you religious? Is there like a weekly thing you go to or tend to?
I used to. Before the pandemic, we'd go to church every week. You know, Sunday we'd go down to Elizabeth Downs Seton, and I never got involved in a church. I mean, I don't, you know, I always kept it at hand's length. You know, I mean, I think it's. And I feel like I'm a religious person. I believe in God, you know, and I think there's a life afterward and everything like that. And I expect I'm going to be with my relatives and my friends when my time comes to visit them. You know, it's like my mother used to say, I'm just not in line. I'm not first in the line yet. I'm just waiting until I get there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that wisdom. Here, a challenge I have for you. I've been talking to a lot of people 16 above, and I said, this is what I say to them. There's a lot of lost, hurting, and confused people that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. I know more in their 20s and 30s because that's people I'm around. But sometimes they just need people in their 20s and 30s. They just need someone that doesn't necessarily have to tell them everything to do, but can kind of just be there to be a sounding board. Right now we have counselors and professional people we can talk to, but I think it can be a lot more organic than that. It can be a lot more natural than that. Kind of like we're having a conversation now. I would challenge people with life experience, people who've gone through stuff, take the time outside of your immediate family to try to, whether you want to or not, but see if you can make a difference or an impact on the generation that's coming up.
The generation's coming up.
And because there's a guy I was talking to in the sauna. He has his own business just down the street, and I was talking to him, and he's like, and that's what he said. He's like, Josiah, because we had talked a few times, and I want to interview him as well. But he's like, I know there's so many guys out there in their 20s and 30s that just they just need someone there that can kind of guide, like mentorship, that can guide them, help them guide them through life.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my challenge to you is if you think about, however many years you have left, let's say 20, right? It's possible, right?
Yeah, it's possible.
I mean, you had someone lived 106.
Yep.
And I would say, I challenge you, if you reached out to 20 and 30-year-olds, whether it's natural or organic, just let them know, hey, I'm here to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think men in general don't talk to other men unless it's maybe like a really good friend or family member. But in general, men don't go seek just guidance or help with other men. And if we did that, I think we could solve a lot of these problems. Like common sense, right? You have common sense, but people in their 20s and 30s don't have that life experience. They have a lot of theory. You have theory and experience. So you can be like, hey, we thought through a lot of those things as well.
Yep.
This is the likely outcome, right? Because it's like we look at the current situation we're at, and it's like a lot of theories, a lot. But you're like, hey, I know where those theories lead to, right? And I can kind of guide you through that. Versus if people in their 20s only talk to people in their 20s, right? You're going to get bad ideas.
Yeah.
You don't have someone sitting there with perspective. It's what a parent does to a child. My children, right? I'm there to guide them through life. Because if I let them just sit there in their little mindset, then they're going to just not progress in life.
Right.
So as a parent, I'm there to guide them through life. So I would challenge you, if you so want to. It may seem unnatural or it may seem awkward, but I think there's a lot of men, whether admitted or not, they are confused, they're lost. And if you see someone, just say, hey, I'm here to talk if you want to talk, or if you want to, just have a conversation about life. Because I think it's important, I think it's valuable, but it's something we miss in today's society, where people from different generations are coming together to talk. Because you've experienced hardship, you lost an eye, right? You've experienced death, you've experienced, you've been a father, you've been a military person, you worked for a business, so you have a lot of knowledge and experience, and that's wisdom that can be shared with the next generation. So part of the reason I do this is I know most people aren't going to write a book. Most people aren't going to start a YouTube podcast. Most people aren't going to do that stuff because you've enjoyed your life. But I'd say it's worth sharing and it's worth inputting to other people's life if that's something you want to do. Because now we have influencers, but a lot of them are 18 to 25 with very minimal life experience. And I think we're being influenced by the wrong influencers.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to say, hey, go, unless you feel called to, go start a TikTok and dance. I don't think you want to do that.
No.
But if you can just make an impact, and just like you made an impact in all those businesses, all those restaurant owners, all those people, I think you can make an impact on the next generation of men that are coming up.
Yeah.
So that's my challenge to you. But again, I appreciate you doing this. It's fun because, I see you, my kids see you. Oh, Ken, they know Ken now.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure as we walk by, we'll have more conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
I really appreciate this. If there's one thing you could share with your 35-year-old self, that's how old I am. What's something you would tell your 35-year-old self that you now know or have experienced?
I don't know that I could tell them. What would I tell them? Be respectful of the people that are around you, your wife, your kids, your children. The people that are older than you and younger than you. If you could just be more respectful to them, don't just wave them off and think that you're the only person in the world with the answers, because you're not. But listen to them too. I think that I did that. I listened to people when I was in my 30s. The guys who were in their 60s that were above me and in doing the job that I was doing. I worked with 3 different people, and I was in my 30s, and I was probably 35. And I just watched the way all three of them handled the job that I was going to be doing. You know, one was he did nothing. Okay, I mean, he was milquetoast. He didn't, you know, he wouldn't, explain anything to anybody, and his name was Wayne, and
He would just fail them.
he didn't help them at all. John Lorenz was, boom, I mean, he was the Gestapo of the health department, right? I'm going to do it that way, and do it this way, and do it that way, And then there was Howard Wood. And Howard Wood was the one that made the most impression on me. Howard would sit there and talk to these guys, and by the time he had them relaxed and comfortable, he could tell them anything, and they would believe him. And I looked at that, and Howard got things accomplished. John, they were shit afraid of him, If this guy come in here, he was like, "Ooh, man, he's a cop, and you got to be careful with him." Wayne, nobody respected him because he even when they knew they were doing something wrong, he didn't know it, or he didn't say anything about it. Howard was the guy, and that's kind of the way I approached my job, and the way I went with people. So I would tell people to, take a look around. You got a job to do. Take a look around at the people that are doing your job. Who do you respect the most, and how do they get the job done that you have to do? And do it that way. That's the only way you're going to learn how to do it. That's how I learned how to do it. You're not all knowing, all God. John was a great guy. He knew that book inside and out. I mean, he wouldn't budge an inch. Howard knew the book inside and out too, but he made everybody else comfortable, and they did it.
Yeah.
John, they were worried about it. If you didn't follow his rules, he was, he didn't know what he was going to do to you. That's it.
Well, I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
It was an interesting situation. I mean, to get into talk about life in general, I don't think about that often.
Yeah, most people don't, but once you sit down and take time to really think it through.
Some of the things that happened as I was growing up, we talked about Jimmy, and I can remember when I was in the service and I came back home on my first leave after I'd been in there for 6 months, and I was getting the top secret security clearance, right? And so the FBI went to the neighborhood and talked to all the people in the neighborhood. What did I do? What was I like? And everything, right? And so I went home, and it was summertime. It was in July, and I went home, and I was driving up the road, and Jimmy used to sit in this front porch, and he's a big old guy, right? And he saw me driving up the road, and all of a sudden, he, can. So I stopped. Says, "What's the matter, Jimmy?" He says, "You got to go back to base. The FBI is looking for you." I said, "No, Jim, it's okay." I said, "I'm getting the top secret security clearance." I said, "They're just asking people questions. I haven't gone AWOL."